So I've just hit record and we'll get started. As an agenda for today, we'll give you a brief introduction to the ACT initiative and the scope of the project, and then we'll go into further details about the iron and steel sector methodology specifically. And then we'll focus on the two key areas that we'd like to share with you today in which you can contribute, the public consultation and the iron and steel road test, with a few more details about the schedule for the road test in 2021. We'll then wrap up with some details about the outputs, guarantees and commitments with regards to the road test, and with a brief recap, some final details about how you can get involved with the ACT initiative. So firstly, as an introduction to the ACT initiative, ACT stands for Assessing Low Carbon Transition, and it assesses company and sector level commitment to the Paris Agreement and keeping global warming to well below 2 degrees. We measure this through sector-specific methodologies that assess companies holistically through a mix of qualitative and quantitative indicators, and provide companies with a final ACT rating made up of 3 scores, which I'll go through further in detail on another slide, which you can see the breakdown in. ACT is a joint voluntary initiative between CDP and ADEME. CDP is an environmental disclosure platform that collects environmental performance data from companies and cities and other stakeholders around the world. And ADEME is the French Agency for Ecological Transition, a part of the French government, and the project is funded by EIT Climate Kick. So on this graph, if we look forward to 2050, we see the well below 2 degree scenario commitment and the reference technology scenario. The reference technology scenario is made up of business as usual activity, recent trends and NDCs that have been made. If we continue our path to 2050, we will see a huge emissions gap between where we are and where we should be. And this highlights the urgent action that's required to close the gap in absolute emissions for the future. Apologies for the branch of the graph. I think there's just something wrong with the graphics, but I hope the graph's clear enough. So as an overview of the ACT initiative and the sectors that we've worked on, since its inception in 2015, ACT has developed methodologies for high impact sectors. So completed methodologies in purple on the left, you can find on our website, easily available. Then we have methodologies which have been in development since 2019 and they're currently under finalization, so you'll be able to access them in 2021. Today's focus is the iron and steel methodology, which has been under development since June 2020. And forward-looking to 2021, we'll be commencing work on 4 other sectors. So just as an overview for the project, we'll dive further into iron and steel specifically. If we look at the schedule for the project, between the inception through to next year, methodology development is, as mentioned, started in June 2020, and in 2021 we will work on iron and steel road tests. So we take a staggered approach. We have methodology development in 1 year and then sector road test happening the following year. So for example, you can see just next to iron and steel, 2019 focused on oil and gas, cement and transport methodology development, and in 2020 we're now working on the oil and gas, cement and transport road tests. So just some more information about the ACT rating I mentioned earlier. We have the breakdown of the 3 scores. The first is a performance score, which is made up of company assessments through key performance indicators. And this is a mix of quantitative and qualitative indicators across 9 modules to try and capture a holistic understanding of the company's performance. The second is the narrative score, and this focuses more on company reputation, consistency, and credibility, and it's based in the sector overall. And the third is the trend score, which assesses if an ACT assessment or an analysis were to be carried out for the company in the future. What sort of path do we see the company on? Do we see an emissions gap closing? Do we see an increase in the score? Or do we see company performance staying as it is? So these 3 scores make up the ACT rating, and the methodology can be used to carry out the company assessment and provide a company with these 3 scores. So if we break down the process of how we get from methodology development to the ACT rating, firstly, throughout the methodology development process, we engage with a multi-stakeholder technical working group through several meetings across 6 to 7 months of the development process. Alongside the meetings, we have consultation phases on drafts of the methodology to gather feedback, and we also pilot test the methodology with real companies as part of the road test. Once the methodology is finalized, this allows us to carry out company assessments with an ACT-trained analyst and be able to gather data from the company and provide a company with tailored feedback. And this leads to the final ACT score. So our focus for today is specifically on our final consultation phase and the methodology road test. So that was a general overview of the ACT project, the schedule and the setup. I'll now pass over to Marlene, who'll give you more detail about the iron and steel methodology specifically. Go ahead, Marlene.
Thank you, Dua. So now let's have a sneak insight in the steel methodology. So first of all, as Dua explained previously, we engage with a technical working group to work on the methodology. And we are proud to say that for iron and steel, we work with 27 technical working group members over 5 continents. So there were people coming from steel companies, such as ArcelorMittal, for example, Tata Steel, or Ugitech, Aperam, etc. There were business associations, and the first of all was the World Steel Association. There were NGOs, such as the World Benchmarking Alliance or Réseau Action Climat, which is a French NGO, and there were also academics from Sustain in UK, for example, and investors such as the NCA Investment. So next slide, please, Dua. So with technical working group and with all the material we discovered in the bibliography, we drew a picture of what does a low carbon steel company look like. And I will present this using the 5 guiding question of ACT, which is what has the company committed to, what is it going to do in the future, what does it do in the present, what is its legacy, and most of all, what is the consistency of all these actions. So a low-carbon steel company committed on science-based targets on its production emission, because it's the emission coming from production are the most important emission in the life cycle of the steel product. Then the company should disclose a transition plan that shows a growing share of low carbon systems and services and operational steps to achieve the objectives. Then for the present, the investment strategy for new generation capacity and the investment in R&D shall place clear focus on low carbon alternatives or technology for decarbonization. It's really important because steel industries has long-lasting assets, and so if you invest now, this asset will be there in 2050, and so it's really important to take the right decision of investment now. In the past, there shall be an evident trend of lowering emission intensity of the product, and this trend should be achieved through deliberate operational or investment decisions. And what about the consistency of the whole thing? There shall be a consistent willingness to achieve the goals of the low carbon transition, and the company should be a strong actor in circular economy during all the life stages of the products. So what about the scope of the ACT methodology? The scope is the companies that can be assessed using the ACT iron and steel methodology. So as you can see, we think of the whole iron and steel sector using segments. So from raw material extraction to steel product shaping and downstream. So the scope is the boxes that are in green or blue. I don't know exactly what is this color. All the integrated companies with or without raw material extraction are in the scope. Then in the scope we have also all the companies that are steel making and casting companies, and we have also the companies that are shaping steel products. Scrap steel recyclers are also included in the scope. So we assess companies that are producing steel using iron ore or scrap steel. Next slide, please. Do well. So now let's have a look at the boundaries. The boundaries are which emissions are considered during the ACT assessment. As I already said, most of the emission of steel products comes from the steel production and the raw material preparation for iron making and for steel production. So all the yellow boxes are in the boundaries. So we take into account the raw material within the iron and steel chain value, which is the first block. We take into account the raw material preparation, the iron making, the steel making and casting, and the rolling mills. And then downstream for product shaper, steel shaper companies, we take into account all the emission. Then outside the value chain, the direct value chain of iron and steel, we also take into account the emission coming from raw material preparation, which is not metal or iron, so the lime production, the hydrogen production, the ferroalloys production, and all that concern the energy production. Next slide, please, Dua. So Dua spoke about the performance score of ACT, which is calculated using 9 modules. So here is the focus on these performance modules, and the weighting that we had chosen for all these modules. So we choose to segregate the iron and steel sector in 3 segments. On the one hand, the integrated companies, then the steel producers, and then the product shapers. And as you see, we put a very high weighting on the material investment module for integrated company and steel producers, because, as I already said, the emissions are very important at this stage of the process, and the integrated companies and the steel producer can take action on their own investment to reduce their emission. On the contrary, for product shaper, we chose to put a high burden on sold product performance, because the emissions are coming from upstream, from the steel producer, and product shaper should take action to reduce emission by discussing and taking action with their steel supplier. Then the benchmarks that we use for the quantitative indicators, so mostly for the target and material investment modules, we use a benchmark, and we assess the company against the company benchmark that is computed from the sectoral benchmark. And this sectoral benchmark that we use is the one of the International Energy Agency called ETP-SDS. And the International Energy Agency has just released a new version of this scenario in 2020, in September 2020. And so we will be using in the ACT methodology this scenario. So you can see that in this scenario, the emission of CO2 per ton of crude steel for scope 1 and 2 should decrease from about 2 tons of CO2 per ton of crude steel to less than 1 in 2050. And as a reminder, in this scenario from IEA, they considered that that action should be taken to reduce steel demand, and so the steel production will increase, but not as much as the baseline that is the business as usual scenario. So next slide, please, Dua. So this is the last slide on the steel methodology to give you some key considerations that were discussed during the technical working group meetings. So these key considerations were how do we assess different companies along the value chain, and we have steel producer, we have product shapers, they have not the same level of decarbonization. So how do we do? How do we measure emission along different processing routes or technology? You can produce steel using a blast furnace. You can produce steel using scrap and EAF. So how do we measure emission? How do we assess this company? And the 3 last key considerations were about circular economy. How does the methodology should consider circular economy, still circularity, but also the role of byproduct and waste from steel industry, for example, the use of slag in the cement industry. And at last, how do we consider synergies between steel and other industry? This question is for slag, but also for CO2, for example, or of gases. So what we wanted here is to give you the flavor of the methodology, because it was not the purpose of this meeting to dive deeply into the methodology. So if you want to know more, the methodology is currently available online for public consultation. So you can read it, and you can even contribute to its improvement by commenting this methodology. And it's the last time to do it before the road test. So for this public consultation, here are the details. You can contribute until the 30th of November. The methodology is publicly available on the Scribe platform, where you can provide comment to the full methodology. You just have to register to the platform, because the comments are not anonymous. So if you want to go to and comment this methodology, you have to follow the link to ScribeHub on our website's participate page. So you have the link of this page here. And why should you comment this methodology? Because we want you to share your sector knowledge alongside our technical working group. It will help us to make the ACT methodology relevant, all the more relevant across the globe and across the value chain. And as I said, it's the last opportunity to provide input before finalization of this methodology, and before that we use it during the road test. So now I leave the floor to Dua to present the details of this road test.
Thank you very much, Marlene. Just the link that Marlene mentioned on our website for the link to the public consultation is available in the chat box if you'd like to take a look. So now for a deep dive into the iron and steel road test. A similar breakdown. These will take place next year between March and September. The road tests are targeted at iron and steel companies. We engage with a maximum of 15, and we aim for companies that represent different parts of the value chain that fit within the scope of the methodology, which we showed earlier, as well as a geographically diverse group of companies to accurately measure challenges and opportunities for steel around the world. What is the road test specifically? It's a pilot test of the ACT methodology with real data from iron and steel companies. It's a free ACT assessment, and it takes the methodology from theory to application. And it allows us to modify the methodology based on feedback from when data is actually applied into the indicators. What works and what doesn't work for the indicators and the modules, and how we can further improve measurement of low carbon transition for the iron and steel sector. A few more details about how the process works. There's 5 key phases. For the company specifically, you'll have a kickoff meeting with an ACT-trained analyst. The second stage is data collection with the company for the relevant data points. And then that will lead to the assessment by the analyst across the modules mentioned in the methodology, and then narrative and trend assessment as part of the 3 scores of the ACT rating. Once the assessment is complete, there's a tailored presentation of the results and the scores with the company, and there'll be a final meeting with other companies that were involved in the road test and the methodology development. So the multi-stakeholder group mentioned earlier. We'll discuss the lessons learned and the modifications that are being made to the methodology as a result of the road test. Why the road test is a key part of the methodology development. It allows companies to benefit from a free ACT assessment to measure their low carbon strategy, and gives you the opportunity to be involved in an innovative initiative to compare your company's carbon strategy with sectoral decarbonisation pathways and find areas to improve. It allows us to improve the methodology itself and tap into your expertise. And there's also an opportunity for the company to benefit from training on the ACT methodology to move towards a more autonomous approach with your low carbon strategy for the future. And it also allows the company to showcase to partners and investors efforts being made to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So now I'm going to just go further into detail about the 5 key phases explained earlier. So in terms of the schedule for iron and steel, kickoff will begin in March, and then data collection through April and May. Assessments will will carried out between the end of May to about mid-July, and tailor feedback across end of July and August, and the final meeting with the group of companies and the technical working group will take place in September. So I just highlighted the second stage, the data collection with the company, because this is perhaps the key part in which we require company involvement, because the analyst will be able to give you the key data points which are required to the assessment, and this is where the company's role is particularly important. In other aspects of the road test, the analyst is able to take the lead, but the company engagement for data collection is key for the process. And we have 2 key meetings. We have the kickoff meeting and the final meeting with the group of companies, but in the middle, there's a flexible approach to how many meetings you may require with the analyst. So there's a flexible approach to what works for the company in terms of time constraints and availability, but this can be discussed with the analyst and in a way that best suits you. So some details about the key output guarantees from us and commitments from the companies for the road test. There are 3 key outputs of the road test. The first is an individual company report. This is company specific, and it gives the full score breakdown of the assessment. So the analyst will be able to go into detail about your ACT rating and how you performed and ways to improve. The second is a road test public report. This is a culmination of the 15 company road test results with aggregated scores and anonymized company scores, and give a breakdown of the full road test process and overall sectoral outlook of how companies performed. And the third is a methodology feedback report, which specifically for the ACT project, it will outline the key modifications that need to be made to the methodology as a result of the road test. So we find out what works and what doesn't, and we take those recommendations forward and update the methodology. Okay, so a few guarantees from the ACT team for you. The first is data confidentiality. with the road test that the team has already carried out, we have an established approach. So firstly, there's a guarantee that your data will remain confidential. Your individual ACT score will also remain confidential. And a non-disclosure agreement can be signed with addendum consultants, consultants meaning analysts, to share individual company data. And a final road test report will only present the aggregate anonymized scores. So your company will not be singled out in any way. Training. For the analyst, this specifies that the analyst will be fully trained in the ACT initiative and the sector methodology prior to the road test. So they will be well versed in the process. And for you, there's a full-day ACT assessment training available to move towards that autonomous approach and really dive deep into the process and how an assessment is carried out. And the third is collaboration. The ACT team is highly engaged with the process alongside the analysts and companies, and we remain at your disposal to answer questions and concerns throughout the road test process. And a few details about commitments from the companies. We've been very lucky to engage with several companies across the sectors that we've already worked on for road tests. And a few things that we require from the companies include selecting a project lead as the main point of contact for the road test, collect the data required for the ACT assessment, so the data collection process with all the data points that the analyst will need. Overall, depending on how many meetings you would like and what works best for you and the analyst, about 5 to 10 working days is required as a commitment over the 6 to 7 month process. We also ask that the project lead is actively engaged throughout the process from initiation in March to completion in September 2021. And just an agreement that CDP and ADEM, as founders of the project, can communicate about the road test publicly through aggregated and anonymized scores, as I mentioned, about the public report output as the summary of the road test. So there's a lot of information throughout this webinar. I'm just going to use one slide to sum up the key takeaways and how you can get involved and a few details about next steps. So firstly, we have the ACT road test. 15 iron and steel companies are invited to take part and help us test out our methodology and help us to further improve on sectoral decarbonisation. We have a terms of reference available for companies to sign and express their interest, and you can access that on the same link that is in the chat already on the participate page of the ACT initiative. And the deadline for submissions is 15th of January. Just a disclaimer that if we have more than 15 applicants for the road test, our goal is to achieve a strong geographic distribution, representation of the value chain and the size of the company. So we'll make a selection that covers all of these bases across the companies that we assess. The second invitation was for you to participate in the public consultation. So this is not just for companies, but sector stakeholders in general. This is open from now to 30th November. And this is the final consultation before the methodology is taken forward to the road test. And besides that, if you have any questions, and I see some questions coming through on the webinar, which we can go through, but if you have any other questions, if you'd like to hear more about how our existing road tests are going, or any clarifications you require, then please feel free to get in touch with myself or Marlene. I will post our email addresses in the chat as well. Yeah, I guess this is everything that we wanted to cover, but we can move on to some questions. And thank you very much for your attention to this webinar. It was really a pleasure to be able to present all of our work so far with you, and we look forward to engaging with you on this. Just a few questions that have come through. Can you confirm World Steel's participation in this proposal? Yes, World Steel is part of our technical working group in the methodology development, and we've been engaging with them throughout the meetings as well. Another question is, would the road test outputs be publicly available? Yes, one aspect of them will be, which is the road test summary report. Individual company reports will remain between the analyst and the company themselves, but the aggregated anonymized summary of the road test for the sector and for the methodology will be available publicly. Would the company selection for the road test consider the real share of steel production routes? Sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question. Let me perhaps, Marlene, you are able to answer that question. Are you unmuted, Marlene?
Yes,
yes?
I'm muted.
Okay, good.
As I cannot see the question in the chat, I'm sorry about it. Can you repeat it for me, please, Dua?
Yes, no problem. Would the company selection for the road test consider the real share of steel production routes? So blast furnace, basic oxygen furnace.
Yes, that will be one criteria of our choice, because what we want is to test the methodology, and if in different cases, so we want companies that use blast furnace, but we also want companies that use EAF and use scrap steel, and we also want companies that use both, because it can be a bit challenging for the methodology and the computation of some indicators. So yes, this will be a criteria.
Great, thanks, Marlene. Another question is, will the ACT scores be considered by CDP in their scoring of companies of climate change disclosure, especially for those which could not adopt SBTI? At the moment, the ACT scores are not integrated into the CDP disclosure platform. The assessment is carried out separately, specifically for the road test, because it is a pilot test. It's not a final assessment. It's a test run of the methodology. It will not be considered in the CDP disclosure. It's a separate process and a voluntary process that companies can take part in. But a lot of the data, if you're already disclosing to CDP, there's some data points which are relevant for ACT as well, which we, in the data collection process, if you already disclose to CDP, can be directly transferred to contribute to your ACT assessment as well. Another question is, what about stainless steel companies? I'm assuming you're asking if they're in the scope. Yes, the stainless steel companies are also in the scope of the methodology and can be assessed in the road test.
Yes, and if I can say something about stainless steel companies, it will be very interesting to have stainless steel companies in the road test, because the application of the methodology will be challenging because we will have to take into account ferroalloys production, and we design an indicator to take this into account, and we have to test it. So it would be very interesting to have stainless steel companies.
Thanks, Marlene. Another question similar to the previous question about CDP disclosure. It's how, sorry, I lost the question. About replacement of the CDP methodology with the ACT methodology. As mentioned previously, the ACT initiative is a complementary process, and specifically with the road test, it's a test run of the methodology. So we don't intend to replace the CDP disclosure with the ACT methodology. The CDP disclosure platform is separate, but with relevant data that can also be applicable to ACT. And I think the question also mentioned ranking. The road test and the ACT methodology do not rank companies against each other. It's more about testing their methodology with your data and providing you with input. It's not a comparison between you and other companies, which is why we keep the final assessment report anonymized and aggregated. Another question that we have is, if the road test is successful, will the ACT methodology be integrated with CDP in the future? That's an interesting question because there is already some similarity and overlap between CDP, and CDP is a partner on the project. This is something in discussion about how we take ACT forward. So looking further down the line after our 4 other sectors that are planned to be developed in 2021 and 2022, this is something that we will further explore, and how we can combine the annual emission disclosure in CDP with the forward climate science approach that ACT takes. So this is definitely something under consideration, but not fully ironed out yet. Marlene, perhaps you can take this question. It came through at the very beginning. Does science-based targets commitment from companies? I guess it's asking about whether science-based target commitments from the companies is taken into account if it's verified by the SBT initiative. I think that's what it's referring to.
Yes, I can handle this question. We have a module in the performance score of ACT, which is the target module. And if the company has science-based target, the indicator in the target module that deals with the target setting will have the highest score if you have a science-based target. And we are fully aligned with the SBT initiative on this indicator. And what I wanted to mention too, because I forgot it in my presentation, is that, or perhaps said it, but I will say it again. We used to compute company benchmark. We use the work of the SBT initiative about the sectoral decarbonization approach to compute the company benchmark using the sectoral benchmark coming from IEA. So yes, we work with SBT and we are aligned. But ACT goes one step further, because we do not only assess and work on targets, but we also work on the means that you are using to reach your target, and how you're managing climate transition within your own company, and how you are and what is your business model to transition.
Thanks, Marlene. Just another question which I'll direct to you. Is the ACT methodology based on World Steel Reporting methodology?
Oh, that's a good question. We use the World Steel Reporting methodology to draft some indicator, but the World Steel methodology is about, if I'm not wrong, about counting emission linked to the products on an LCA perspective. And what we do within ACT is not just counting emission, but trying to see if the companies use all the levers she can use for deep decarbonization of its activity. So we cannot use directly World Steel methodology, but it was part of the bibliography and part of what inspired us to craft some indicators.
Thanks, Marlene. And we have one more question about the science-based targets methodology. I think I can answer this one. It's about the methodology from SBT being under discussion within the steel industry, because it does not represent all the production routes, and whether or not we're considering the situation. Yes, we are taking this into consideration, particularly because it was raised by some of the members of the technical working group that are involved in this. As well as SBT, so we're aware of the questions and the approach under consideration, and we're communicating about ACT and possible alignment with SBT and other initiatives that are measuring emissions reduction in a different way. So yes, it's definitely under consideration for ACT as well, because of the stakeholders that we have involved with us. But I think the key thing is that as the public consultation is launched, and through discussions from the technical working group meetings, we're continuing to gather feedback on our approach and SBT and how we can improve and align. So this is something still under development, and we'd really like continued feedback on this and how we can strengthen ACT further. One more question, Marlene. I think I might direct this to you. Would the methodology be ready to appreciate delayed response? Sorry, I feel... okay, your question got cut off, sorry, from the beginning. The iron and steel sector is facing challenges to respond to the climate, so there's a lot of breakthrough initiatives being pursued. So assume if we have targets and performance over the next 15 years, if they're above the trajectory you've shown, but they fall below the trajectory around 2040 to 2060. Would the methodology be ready to appreciate such delayed response?
Very good point. In the methodology, I'm not sure we are able to assess a target that is later than 2050, but it's just a question of computation, so we can. I think that we can. That we can add it in the tools that is developed with the methodology. But yes, if we assess only the first target and if it's really above the company benchmark, yes, the score will not be very good for the target module, clearly. But I'm pretty sure that we can assess the second target on 2060, because I understand that the breakthrough that steel industry are waiting for are coming, but not so soon. But what I wanted to say that the target module is only one module of ACT. It is weighted, if I remember correctly, 15% of the performance score. And even if the target, the first target is not as how can I say that, as good as it should be, we can assess other things about how the company is engaged in R&D, for example. If the company has the company a lot of R&D expenses in low carbon transition or not, and that's to my mind the strength of the ACT methodology, that we are not assessing the low carbon transition of a company just using one indicator about target or about the current trajectory of the company CO2 emission, for example, but on a holistic set of indicators. And so we are able to show to the companies what it has to improve and in what the company perform already well.
Thanks, Marlene. I think that's all of the questions that we have come through the Q&A so far. So since it's just towards the end of the hour, I think it's sufficient to wrap up here. If you have any more questions, I've just posted our email addresses in the chat, just below the link for participation for both the consultation and the road test. So please feel free to reach out, and we're looking forward to hearing more from you for both the road test and the consultation. Thank you very much for your participation today in the webinar. There was a question about sharing the material. Yes, the recording will be available on the ACT website very soon, and we'll also send around the recording to all those that registered to the webinar. So thank you very much once again, and I hope you have a lovely rest of the day. Looking forward to your contributions and involvement in ACT.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. And just a comment, my email address is marlene.bouvet adem.fr. I'm not in CDP doer. I know we work together.
It's a reflex. Apologies. Yes, Adem.
It's funny. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for your attention and looking forward to work with you.
Thank you very much. Take care. Bye.